Hub and Air Ventures on the Take Action series. For this session, we are looking at accessibility and inclusive design thinking. This topic came to me, or came about, because I realized that I had some new positions at Digital Bridge, my daytime job. I had new positions opening up, and I realized that if I had somebody from somebody who was disabled, and particularly I was thinking of the deaf and hard of hearing community because I am connected with several members of that community. If they came and applied for the job, I realized that I didn't have the resources to make sure that my workplace was accessible and inclusive of them. And one of the great things about being in the role that I am with Sim South Florida is when I have a problem at work, I can pull together a bunch of experts, create an event, and not only answer the questions for myself, but also for everyone who attends. So this partly is because I needed to figure out how to make this work for me. So hopefully it is beneficial to everyone as well. We also, as a planning committee, we learned very quickly in our planning that we can't expect to snap our fingers and have a accessible and inclusive environment. It's something that we have to plan for, and you have to think ahead for. And that's where our title for today came from, is if you think about how we use design thinking in so many other areas of our work life or our life, we should be using design thinking as we're planning how we're going to make our workplaces and our products accessible and inclusive. So want to share with you some statistics. If I can get my slide deck to advance. There we go. So I did a little Googling. The CDC has a lot of information that's very helpful. And there are about 25, 26%, depending on what year you look at it, of adults in the United States have some type of disability. So when we're thinking about products, would we immediately eliminate 1/4 of our potential customers? Is that good business sense? Of course it's not. We've talked a lot in I guess SIM and other organizations about how we need more talent. Well, if we're not designing accessible and inclusive workplaces, we're eliminating 25% of our potential candidates for jobs. So there's a lot of value there that we can get simply by thinking ahead and making sure that our workplaces and our products are accessible and inclusive. And I think I mentioned this on LinkedIn at one point. Even people who are not disabled use some of the features that are designed with accessibility in mind. The story I told on LinkedIn was that I was playing Minecraft with my son, and I was having trouble hearing where the zombies were coming from. And he said, well, just turn the captions on and it tells you where they're coming from. Well, even somebody who is hearing can benefit, from a little help now and then. So the other thing I wanted to mention on this slide, it does mention, how the percentage breaks down by different type of disability, which is also interesting. But it's also interesting to look at how disability and ethnicity and race play in. When we're talking about diversity, disability is something that crosses all lines. Whatever label that's being applied to you, you can also have the label of disability. So it's very almost inclusive, like everybody is impacted by it. It affects everybody. The next slide, actually, it's a little old. It's from 2015. I wasn't able to find a nice infographic that was newer. And it talks about how many people who have disabilities are unemployed. So 8 out of 10 disabled people are not in the workforce. That's a lot of value, a lot of potential that, you know, we're not taking advantage of. And I know, you know, the people who are not working, I'm sure they want to work. It's a matter of us making the workplaces accessible for them. So we're going to get started in a moment. I'm going to leave the agenda up for a little bit. We're going to start with our keynote and then followed by a panel discussion. We're going to hold our questions and answers to our breakout sessions, and we'll appreciate your feedback on how this goes. But our thought is that, you know, being able to answer questions and that in a smaller group would be more beneficial for everyone. So we'll give that a try. I also would like to thank Advanced Solutions for being our sponsor this evening. We're very grateful. This is the second event that they've sponsored for Sim South Florida, and we're grateful for their support. I am going to let Mark say a few words about Advanced Solutions, and then we'll continue on.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. For those that don't know me, my name is Mark Ludwig. I serve on the board of directors for Sim South Florida. I'm also the Chief Commercial Officer for Advanced Solutions. We're proud to sponsor this evening's sessions, and we look forward to a great conversation with an all-star panel. For those of you that don't know Advanced Solutions, I'd like to provide you just a quick overview. So number one, we are digital strategy and transformation consultants with deep implementation and integration experience. More than 25% of the Fortune 100 are our clients. However, we do serve cross industries as well as small and nonprofit organizations such as the World Health Organization and UNICEF. At a high level, we provide strategic roadmaps, business process optimization, implementation, integration services, organizational change management, and managed service solutions. And we are a leading ServiceNow, Salesforce, and Microsoft partner. So please feel free to check us out and reach out to me if we can be of assistance. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Liz.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Advanced Solutions, for the sponsorship. So it's time for our keynote, and it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Kimberly Sharp. Kimberly is a Director of Professional Services for Rising, a premium SAP consulting firm, and has 20 years of combined retail industry and consulting experience. As a data practice lead, Kimberly provides clients with strategic guidance, executive education, and ongoing support necessary to build successful data programs. Kimberly is actively engaged in the SAP data community, serving as New England chapter chair of America's SAP user group, and is a highly regarded thought leader. Passionate about increasing the opportunities for women in IT, Kimberly founded Rising's first employee resource group, Women in Technology. She is also a member of Sim Boston and a 2017 graduate of RLF. And I'm happy to say that I'm also of RLF, I think the same year. So we just went into different sessions. So I'm pleased to welcome Kimberly, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's always great to meet other RLFers, and I'll as I'm setting up here, hopefully you'll bear with me for just a moment. It is very, RLF was just such a meaningful experience for me, and it's how I ended up getting involved in SIM overall. I used that free membership that I got as a graduate, and then kept showing up. So I was really glad that people kept me around, so to speak. So thank you so much. I am known in my professional network by many as a self-proclaimed data geek and a champion, as Liz said, of advancing women in the workplace. Some even call me a bit of a retail industry junkie, but what most people likely don't know about me is that I live with moderate hearing loss. As I was just saying, SIM RLF was profoundly life-changing for me. I rediscovered my authentic self, I found my purpose, and I was welcomed into this community that I remain connected to today. And while I struggled with hearing loss for some time, I never really spoke about it publicly. And it wasn't until I was at a RLF continuing education event in 2019 that I found the courage to share. And I was further encouraged to share more publicly by the other alumni. And so with that encouragement, I did just that. In March, I chose to celebrate World Hearing Day by sharing my story on LinkedIn, really with the hope of providing some awareness and hopefully help to begin to end the stigma that's still very much associated with the deaf and hard of hearing community. This year's theme for World Hearing Day is Hearing Care for All. And the mission really calls upon each of us to promote the importance of screening, rehabilitation, and communication. And so while I have no way to accurately represent the countless personal stories within my new community, and nor would I ever presume to speak for my community as a whole, I can and am honored to share my personal journey with you this evening. So with that, I'll say that I certainly started to discover I was different, but it was definitely a journey that took me 40 years. But I've condensed it for us tonight. I just want to hit some of the high points. Like many children in the United States, I received vision and hearing tests in elementary school. And as a child, I was told that I had nerve deafness and that it was hereditary. Quick flash forward, today, my father has approximately 10% of his hearing remaining. And his siblings have similar but less severe hearing loss. But back in elementary school, I didn't really know what nerve deafness meant. And my parents and teachers at that time took no extraordinary measures on my behalf. Looking back now, I would definitely say that I instinctively learned to adapt to my schooling environment. So I made changes, and they were small ones at first. So sitting in the front of the class, getting up a little courage to ask fellow students around me what was said if I missed something. And I suppose somewhere along the line, I also realized that it was difficult to discern certain sounds, like the ones S's and X's make. My hearing loss, compounded with a then undiagnosed dyslexia, directly impacted, of all things, my ability to spell. So I, for one, am very thankful for spell check. As my hearing became, I guess that my hearing became less of an issue when I entered the workforce. And that was until about 6 years ago, when I started to notice I was using this extra volume button on my cell phone. And I also found myself in conference call settings, really leaning in to hear, put my ears close to the speakerphone as I could get it. Then coworkers started commenting that I was always saying things like, "What?" and "Could you repeat that?" It was, all of those things kind of didn't register with me. But eventually I noticed that if I wasn't directly looking at a person, it was nearly impossible to understand what was being said. And as you can imagine, routine business functions like networking events or dinners just became extremely difficult to navigate. And it was at this point that I could no longer deny that my hearing loss, which was stable for most of my life, had dramatically deteriorated. Acknowledging that something wasn't quite right was quite literally the first step in receiving the support I required. And I'm so fortunate to live outside of Boston, where I have access to one of the world's premier specialty hospitals dedicated to hearing. Massachusetts Pioneer. It's not just an international center for treatment, but it's the world's largest vision and hearing research center and a Harvard Medical School teaching hospital. It was here, kind of right where that arrow is pointing on your screen, that I learned at 40 years old, I have moderate sensorineural hearing loss. This type of hearing loss is a permanent and progressive hearing loss. that occurs when the delicate nerve fibers of the inner ear are damaged. As you can imagine, the diagnosis is difficult to receive, and thoughts immediately started flooding my mind, and my gears really started spinning. Some of the things that I was thinking immediately was, would I lose my ability to hear completely, and how long would that take? Having witnessed my dad and the decline in his hearing, I knew that that was a distinct possibility for me. The next thing I thought about was, how do I learn ASL, and is it difficult? So I'm going to talk to Beth probably after this event and get some more insight on that. Then I thought about family and friends, and how would I be able to communicate with them, and how would they be able to communicate with me? One of the other thoughts that came through my mind was, what if I forgot how to speak, right? If you can't hear anything, does your mind forget how to form words? And then finally, I had a concern of how I would survive financially. Could I continue to work? So this is just some of the initial thoughts and questions I had. And to be quite honest, it took me some time to fully process my diagnosis and also get a grasp on how my life would continue to evolve and be impacted by it. But what I quickly realized is that I had the right team. My team at Mass Eye and Ear is amazing, and they made a real effort to get to know me. They understood my professional lifestyle as a consultant. They even asked about hobbies outside of work. And at the time, I didn't realize just how important this was. It was a critical stage in developing a personalized treatment plan. So this is just a little bit about what my plan includes. And I'd like to remind you that everybody's plans are different. But for me, first and foremost, the plan included a recommendation to begin utilizing hearing devices. And it was suggested that I use hearing aids with Bluetooth capabilities so that I could stream phone calls and media directly into my hearing aids. This is really important. As a consultant, I'm on the road a lot and take a lot of phone calls. So this has been a game changer. On the flip side, it was also suggested that I wear, in certain situations, protective devices to minimize the impact of environmental factors. So some examples include noise canceling headphones. I'm on planes 12 to 24 hours a week. And so wearing those noise canceling headphones is helping to protect the hearing I have left. High fidelity earplugs is also extremely important for me because I put myself in extremely loud situations in the form of country music festivals and concerts. I love them a lot, and I didn't want to have to give those up. So having protective devices as part of my treatment plan was really important. I didn't see some things coming. So I didn't realize that my hearing loss would affect more than my ability to hear. I developed tinnitus, which is a ringing or buzzing in the ear. And I also developed significant balance issues, which caused me to experience prolonged bouts of motion sickness and nausea. So believe it or not, some simple solutions. We added an allergy nasal spray to help me open up my sinuses, which then relieve pressure in my ears. And then there's some simple things around motion sickness, like acupuncture, wearing pressure point wristbands, sometimes taking Dramamine. It really does help me to actively manage my symptoms around the motion sickness I experience. But here's what I would tell you. In my effort to learn more about the deaf and hard of hearing community I was becoming a member of, I quickly realized that I am the lucky one, and I'm grateful. I have access to and the financial means to receive ongoing treatment and management of my hearing loss, not to mention consistent full-time employment. I was shocked, and Liz shared some statistics at the beginning of our time together, but the statistics regarding the deaf and hard of hearing community were heartbreaking to me and really unbelievable to a certain level. So if you will bear with me, I'd love to share some of them with you. The first is that 430 million people across the globe have disabling hearing loss that requires rehabilitation services. What's more impactful is that by 2050, it's estimated to almost double. And at that point, it will be nearly 1 in every 10 people on the planet. Only 17% of those who could benefit from hearing devices actually use one. The largest barrier to entry is the lack of accessible healthcare, but the other is cost. Speaking specifically in the United States, the cost of hearing devices is not normally covered by our health insurance. One hearing aid can range from $1,000 to $4,000, but premium hearing devices can cost as much as $6,000 per device. A couple of things to keep in mind. These costs are not one-time costs. As technology advances and gets better, and with normal wear and tear, these devices have to be replaced over time, so it's an ongoing expense. The second thing to keep in mind is that many of us require more than one device. We treat each ear individually, and some of us even require additional accessories. For example, when I'm in meetings, I have a Bluetooth receiver that allows me to choose what I want to amplify or not amplify. The sad thing is that it's estimated with $1.40 additional investment per person, we could significantly scale up ear and hearing care services around the globe. Probably the most staggering statistic, though, is unemployment. Fewer than 40% of people with hearing disabilities work full-time. And as Liz alluded to earlier, it's not because we don't want to work, it's because we lack access and opportunity. And so while these statistics are eye-opening for some of you, they don't begin to explain the mental and emotional impact that hearing loss has on many members of our community. Studies show that deaf individuals experience social emotional difficulties at a rate as high as 2 to 3 times that of their hearing peers. And this is especially true during the COVID-19 pandemic. Nonverbal communication, such as body language, accounts for 55% of total communication. 38% is related to tone. That leaves just 7% for the spoken word. And while we acknowledge that masks have become commonplace as a matter of ensuring public health and flattening the curve, they do significantly compound the social isolation that exists for deaf and hard of hearing community members. So living an active life in a hearing world really stems from our ability to comprehend facial expressions and read lips. I could go on, but I hope what you're beginning to understand is why it's important to talk about hearing health and work actively to end the stigma that still very much exists around living in the deaf and hard of hearing community. And so what can you do? I mean, the great news is that together we can provide a more inclusive experience for our families, friends, and colleagues who belong to this community. And we do that by becoming an advocate and taking action. So I'd like to share with you a few suggestions for you to consider. If you have a deaf or hard of hearing friend or colleague, I encourage you to try wearing a clear mask or a smile mask, as some of us like to refer to them. There's many companies that sell clear masks now. Clear mask is one that you can look at, and I'll provide you a link to take a look at more information about them. From a professional standpoint, so many of us are working remotely, and I was so excited when I logged into the Zoom call today that the accessibility features were turned on. A lot of people don't know that Microsoft Teams and Zoom both offer live transcription, so that there's a transcript that's produced to accompany your recording of meetings, but also offers real-time closed captioning. A few other things to consider at work when you're actually in the same shared space is, the first thing I can say is definitely telephone. Workspaces should include phones capable of video relay calls for those that are fluent in ASL, or a text phone. Meetings is another big area to think about. If you're hosting a meeting, look at the space. Make sure that it allows for good visual access and a direct line of sight to your speakers. But for larger meetings like corporate town halls or all hands, I'd really encourage you to consider providing the services of an ASL interpreter like we have this evening with Beth. The next tip I have is regarding communication. So a lot of times we will have a message sent that's really critical to our business, but spoken verbally in one of these large meetings, even with the help of some of the accessibility features and interpreters, things can still get missed. And so I would encourage you to make all critical corporate communications available in writing and as close to real time as possible by designating a person who's responsible for alerting deaf and hard of hearing team members to those communications. One area you might not think about is training. Look, training is critical for all of us to be successful in our careers, and accessibility is very critical in training, especially as more training moves into training videos and self-guided virtual learning. So you can assist deaf and hard of hearing employees to succeed by providing closed captioning and transcripts for those trainings. And then finally, safety has to be a priority for us. So in the unfortunate event of an emergency in your workplace, having visual cues like flashing lights is important and in some cases statutory where you live. But what is more important, I would suggest, is establishing a buddy system. That buddy system will help your deaf and hard of hearing team members feel included and develop a sense of belonging, but more importantly, safety. So I hope that you find these tips helpful. A lot of them are really easy to implement. They don't require a lot of upfront costs, but I would like to encourage you to think bigger. What if you were 10% bolder? I don't know that we ask this question enough, but if you really want to move the needle, I've got some suggestions. The first one would be proactively recruiting talent from deaf schools. The deaf community is one of the best educated communities in America. Deaf individuals and hard of hearing individuals keep going to schools because we can't get jobs. So you're missing out on an extensive and really excellent talent pool. But I'd like you to think even bolder. Would your company be willing to cover annual hearing screening? This would be a huge step forward for a lot of employers. But I would suggest that you could be even bolder by providing whole or partial coverage for hearing devices. This is probably the boldest idea. It is certainly the most costly, but I think the benefits outweigh any costs that you may accrue. Recently, I had the opportunity to learn a valuable lesson from Minda Hart. She's the author of The Memo, a great book if you haven't read it. She said this: find spaces that celebrate you, not tolerate you. These 8 words taught me that building a workplace that works for everyone takes small amounts of courage every day in the form of consistent small acts. And when we practice allyship and advocacy through bolder leadership, we create those opportunities for belonging. As I shared earlier, I have compiled a list of useful links to research, where to purchase those clear masks, and instructions on how you can activate the accessibility features we discussed in Teams and Zoom. We will provide you a copy of this presentation with active links so you're able to reference them. I'd like to leave you with this. I am hopeful that learning more about the challenges we face as working deaf and hard of hearing individuals, you become an advocate for us and help us create a genuine, authentic, and inclusive workplace where we can not only reach our full potential, but contribute positively to our company's overall performance. I would appreciate the opportunity to get connected and stay connected with you through LinkedIn and email. And I'm certainly happy to have a one-on-one conversation with you if you think that that would be helpful. I hope that you enjoy the remainder of this evening's program. It sounds like a fantastic evening. And again, thank you for providing me the opportunity to share my hearing journey with you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. It was great to hear your story. And also the all the information that you provided. We'll definitely make sure that we get that sent out. And I think I have some action items to take back to the head of HR at my company and see what we can make happen.
That's amazing.
Which, by the way, I did invite her to attend our meeting tonight, but unfortunately she had a conflict. So we're
just
getting
gonna
ready. Yeah, you want to switch to the, let's see.
Yep.
Here we go.
We're going to switch interpreters. Perfect. Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Though we're going to have to bring Beth back, Nikki, because now I'm introducing Beth as our facilitator for the panel. Beth is multi-talented, as you can see. She's playing a lot of parts. She also, was a very significant part of our planning, as she was able to connect us with a lot of people that could participate in our panel tonight. So very grateful for Beth and all of her efforts in helping Sim South Florida become more accessible and inclusive. In fact, we started working with Beth last year, and I was thrilled when Beth expressed her interest in joining the SIM board, and happily we added her to our diversity and inclusion committee, and just looking forward to continuing to work with Beth. So I'll let Beth take over on the panel and introduce our panelists. I will let you know I've been checking. We had, unfortunately, a couple of our panelists, one is having technical issues joining the call, and the other is an IT person. And all of us who work in IT understand that when the company has IT issues, you have IT issues. So he's trying to work through those, and hopefully they'll be able to join at some point, but we will continue as planned and do our best. Right, Beth?
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's just such a pleasure. It's going to be hard for me not to move my hands, but we'll see if I can get through this okay. I'm really excited to be with you this evening. Appreciate you making the time to be with us to learn about this really important topic, and welcome our wonderful guests that we have on our panel this evening. I just do want to start with one thought that I wanted to share with you, and us as advocates in the community, disability community, are really trying to change the word from accommodations, removing that, taking away the burden to always have to ask, and just making things accessible from the beginning, from the ground up. So we're trying to not have to ask and just provide, so everybody feels welcome all the time. And I cannot introduce and tell the wonderful things about our panelists that they can do for themselves, but we have Debbie and Mark and Sam Evans. And I think Joe, is he able to make it or not? I'm not positive. He had an issue. So we're gonna just jump in, and I would love it if our panel.
Know that Michelle has been able to join. So I think it's just Joe that wasn't able to join.
Okay, Michelle is here too. Excellent. Hi, Michelle. Okay, so we have our panelists. So if you could just take turns, we could start with Sam Evans. If you could introduce yourself and tell us about what you do and where you work and why you do the work that you do.
Hello. My name is Sam Evans, and I am a 50-year-old white woman with silver gray hair, wearing purple sparkly glasses. I'm talking to you from my home office. I've got a poster on the wall behind me about disability rights and civil rights. I work for the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, and in my official capacity, I manage our certification programs that establish standards and benchmarks of accessibility knowledge for people who work in accessibility and disability rights. In my unofficial capacity, I am an advocate for accessibility and inclusion, and I spend a good bit of my time, at least for the last 18 months, teaching event and meeting planners and communication professionals how to make digital events accessible and inclusive by clearly stating and building in accessibility features and eliminating the need to request accommodations as best practice. So I'm so excited to join you all today and with my colleagues here, and I'll let Beth move us on to the next panelist.
Wonderful, Sam. Thank you so much. You're just a wealth of information. I'm just so grateful that I met you a year and a half ago, and that there's so many like-minded people out here in the communities, because it does feel very isolating sometimes. So I'm glad to know that we have the support from IAAP and as well. So thank you for that. Michelle Lee, let's talk to you a little bit. Please share who you are, what you do, and your journey a little bit.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Lee. I'm based in Chicago, so not in lovely Florida. I wish. And I'm an Asian woman in her, 30s with long hair that I need to get a haircut. And my background is a virtual background today, and it's aspirational. I would love to have this kitchen as well. So a little bit about me. I am based in Chicago. I work in finance currently for a large financial services corporation, but I'm doing a transition and will be also working with the United Spinal Association to help people with spinal cord injuries like transition from having a traumatic injury to being back into life and society, and running programs there. But my disability, I guess, journey has been one where when in 2003 I had a pretty bad car accident, and I almost died and injured my spinal cord, and as a result, am paralyzed from the chest down. So one day, walking around, having a great time in college. The next day, woke up in a hospital bed, not able to move my legs and not able to have any more finger function. So it's been a while, coming from not being able to do any of the things. I had to relearn how to eat, how to sit, how to type, all the things that one takes for granted. And I've been a champion for accessibility because personally, it matters to me. I needed to be able to do my job. I needed to be able to get around in the world. And I'm really happy we're having this discussion, and I'm super I'm honored to be included in the conversation. So thank you, and thanks, Beth.
Well, we're so glad that you're here, and it's amazing what we could relearn to do in a different way. So we appreciate your courage and perseverance, because that is a lot. So bravo to you. So I'm glad that you're here to join us. And then we're going to move now to Debbie Majors. Debbie, we're glad you're here with us. If you could tell us a little bit about you and your journey in accessibility.
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Debbie Majors. I am recently retired, and I worked in local government for over 30 years. I was not always in the field of accessibility and inclusion, but as a caregiver for my elderly father, who ended up using a wheelchair, I saw firsthand many barriers that he faced just with day-to-day routine things that he needed to do. So when I came back to work at the city, I realized there's so much work to do, and I asked if I could be the ADA coordinator, the Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator for the city. And I had the passion, but I didn't have a lot of knowledge. So I reached out. Beth was one of the first people that I reached out to. And through the WAG group and many other community partners, we've been able to really change our city to becoming much more inclusive, not only in the processes with serving the community, but also with the processes of hiring individuals and employment in general. And when Kimberly was talking about that safety was one of the things that is a high priority, right before I retired, we had just completed a new policy on how to evacuate the building and what to do in certain situations, and having buddies and all those kinds of things. So the policies that we created, the education we provided for all of our leaders and all of our employees has truly made it be a change. It's changed the culture. And so I am sure that if we can do that with the whole city, that there are some tips and things that we can share with you on your journey as well. So I look forward to doing that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. The work that you have done, we miss you desperately. We're glad you're retired, but selfishly, I wish we could dig you out of retirement. But you know, once an advocate, always an advocate. So you're always on. But we appreciate the work that you have done, and it's proof because the city is a different place. I've never ever heard of a fully inclusive city. I mean, we have some, you know, that are autism friendly or, you know, have specific areas, but in a general and a whole. So that's to the work that you actually volunteered, signed yourself up to do. So your heart is amazing. And I've learned so much from you, Debbie. So thank you for joining us. And without further ado, Mark McGuire, he is here with us. He's a doorbuster. He's definitely knows all about accessibility and what to do and what not to do as far as, and I'll let Mark take it away and introduce yourself. And I have the privilege of being able to voice for Mark while he signs. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. This is wonderful panel discussion. So, I'm about 42 and I'm a man, and I was mainstream growing up. Both I talked as well as use sign language for my modes of communication. I'm sorry, can you hold? I can't see your name tag is blocking your hands. Better, thank you. Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay. Better. Yeah. Okay, good. So before I forget, I need to make sure that my signs are accurate and be able to see them again. Okay, so moving on. Sorry about that. So I was born deaf and I grew up mainstreamed, as I mentioned. I learned both how to be able to talk English as well as sign with American Sign Language. I do have a little story about that, but I'll explain that a little bit later on. So what do I do now is that I work as a deaf accessibility and inclusion specialist. And what that really means is that I help businesses and organizations be more inclusive and accessible. So I also recently got certified through IAAP. So I'm excited about that, professional accessibility. So I'm really excited about that with my CPAC. So I'm really looking forward to using those certifications. So I'm proud about that. And I'm an advocate for the deaf and hard of hearing communities. I'm really all people with disabilities, not just deaf and hard of hearing. Yes, deaf and hard of hearing has more than one disabilities, right? Because sometimes deaf people have other things besides deafness that's happening. So it's very interesting. It's really been a really good experience. I'm happy to be with all of you tonight. Thank you so much. Awesome. Thank you, Mark. I have learned so much. We've been working together now for a little bit of time. He's my biggest encouragement. He appreciates all of the work that we do together, and I appreciate you back, Mark. So thank you for that. Oh, I don't have to sign. I'm sorry. We have an interpreter. I'm so sorry. I always forget. Okay. Got to sit on my hands, literally. So now that you have a little glimpse of this wonderful panel that we have for you this evening, I'd really like to start with Michelle. I see her picture is on, so maybe we'll not start there. But any of the questions that we talk about this evening, feel free to please jump in if it's not directed to you and you have a thought. We just want it to be an open forum. We just have some questions just to keep it orderly, but I really would love for it to be a free flowing conversation. Oh, Michelle, yay, you didn't leave us. I'm so happy you're here. So Michelle, could we start with you? I saw a wonderful ad actually recently about a very disorganized candy, at Walmart or Target or these big, and they have all the dollar movie candies put in, and it's just a mess. And I saw this beautiful ad about a picture of a man with Asperger's. In the caption, it said, "What would happen if a company were to hire autistic people?" And then it said they would have an organized efficient, punctual employees, right? And that who really enjoy working, and they will not stop until the task has been completed. And that was so striking to me. It meant so much. Like, yeah, like I know I wouldn't be able to stand at that candy bin and organize it myself, right? But somebody else might really love that type of work. So you have to know who you could place where that will thrive. So Michelle, I just want to start with you, and then anybody else that want to chime in. Why hire people with disabilities?
Oh my gosh, this is Michelle. So thank you so much for asking that question. As a person who kind of joined the disability community late, I hadn't given this a lot of thought, but as a person who's, had to relearn all these things, like, how to eat, how to sit up, I've learned to embrace my disability as well. It was, definitely a journey. At first it's like, whoa, I'm traumatically injured, I'm paralyzed. Oh no, what am I going to do? But my disability has taught me empathy. It's taught me how to connect with people. It's taught me how to be a lot more organized. Like I have to, in order for me to go any place, to travel, to do anything, I have to research in depth if everything is wheelchair accessible, if my wheelchair will be able to get into the place, like how am I going to get it from point A to point B? Like I need to be on, a very strict schedule and plan with my disability, and I have to plan caregivers. It's not easy to maintain my life. I have like a team of people who are helping me get up in the morning, and, I have to manage their schedules on top of mine. So I feel like, a lot of disability, there's a lot of negativity around it and there's a lot of stigma, but people with disabilities are living, they're figuring out how to live their lives. And that's not an easy feat. That's like a project manager, I'm saying. And I feel like, as a person with a disability, it's not a negative thing. And I've learned that my disability has taught me to be more organized and to be a better employee in my job. And I don't think it's a bad thing at all. And I think more people with disabilities need to be embraced in the workforce, because we are more loyal. I feel like the statistics have shown that people with disabilities, and even myself, like I've been with my company more than 10 years, and how many, these days people are switching jobs like left and right, but people with disabilities stay in their jobs more. And that's a proven fact. So those are just a couple reasons to hire people with disabilities. I'm sure others have more. So I'll turn it back to you, Beth.
Well, I see Sam nodding her head. Yes, yes, yes. So Sam, tell us what's on your mind about this. I could see something burning. The wheels are spinning.
Oh,
You're
my
mute.
function-
Okay. Oh, you're mute again. You're mute again, Sam. Okay, she'll come back to us. Does anybody else want to add anything while Sam is thinking? Debbie or Mark, do you want to share anything about that? Debbie?
Just what I'll share, and it kind of goes along the lines of what Michelle mentioned, but I had an assistant when I was working who was blind and had a very difficult time getting a job. But I met him, and I knew from the first conversation we had that this guy's going to work with me. There was just no way. His personality, he was so much fun to work with and to know. So aside from bringing a sense of humor into the office, most of us, when we go to work and you're driving down the road, you hop in your car, you drive down the road, you fight traffic, and fight traffic until you get there. And then you got to park who knows where. And you come in and you start your day. Well, my assistant, who only lived about 17 miles, I think, from the office, because he was blind, he would take a bus to get to work. And it would take him sometimes an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to work, and he'd walk in and he'd be like, "Good morning, how you doing? It's a great day." And I would think, how do you do this? Where do you pull that out of your personality? And why aren't we all like that? Why do we let things get to us? We all have the power to not, but he always came in with such a positive attitude, and that really just poured over all of us, and it created a very happy and fun work environment, which made it better for everybody.
Absolutely, yeah. Ted definitely brings a lot of humor and fun to the table. Sam, I think that you are unmuted, so please share what's on your mind, and then we'll say hello to Joseph in just a second. Joseph, we're glad you're here. Go ahead, Sam.
So my apologies. Something happened. My keyboard stopped functioning with Zoom. So I was gonna technology, yay. Um, I too, I listened to Kimberly's introduction about her hearing loss, and it took me until not too long ago to recognize my mid-range hearing loss, that I always have red lips to compensate, and I turn and listen and cup my ear to hear things. So I live in that world too, but I spent several decades living as a care assistant for my blind roommate, and pre-internet, wow, it was hard to find resources and information. And so I have both personal and lived experience in that dynamic. But having the opportunity for the last 7 or 8 years, I've worked in accessibility, direct service delivery of media and technology. And it's amazing to me. I just want everyone to understand what we have available for us in the 21st century, especially in COVID, to allow the reach of digital and remote work to provide so many opportunities for people who have challenges for transportation, whether that's actual, I have no transit in my city, or I don't drive, or it's difficult to drive. I think we have such an amazing opportunity to extend our reach, and no more excuses to not include the pool of candidates, resources, and colleagues that have every bit as much to offer as the people that are not yet disabled. And so it's a thing. And I work with just amazing colleagues. Just as an example, on communications, I have one colleague that helps on a specialty program who is blind and uses JAWS for screen reader. And listens using his ears. And the other colleague on this project is nonverbal, uses AAC, assistive alternative communication devices. And so her input is text as it contributes to the conversation. And while it may take us a little bit longer to have the conversation for everyone to engage, but if we want to be active listeners and engage and respectful for everyone, learning those different communication styles, it's not going to damage us to pause, take a breath, listen, process, and listen with intent to respond. And so these communication differences, I think, would do us all a bit of good.
I love that. Listening with intent to what somebody is saying. And it doesn't necessarily mean with your voice. It could be with your eyes. It could be with your equipment to be able to communicate, however that looks, but just having a little bit more patience. We're in such a hurry all the time. And I think, like you said, catch that breath and really understand the value that somebody else could bring if you just take the time to give them an opportunity. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, for sure. Rogine, I see that 100%. Yes, I love that. So we're just going to take a moment before we get on to the other questions and just introduce Joseph. We're so happy you made it here, Joseph. You're such a valuable part of this.
For being late.
No worries. It's better late than never.
Never a dull moment in IT. Never a dull moment.
Well, I appreciate that you do that, because I could never do IT. I would throw my computer out the window. It's not my friend. I'm very intimidated by IT. So thank you for that. So, and I just wanted to move on now, and then we'll give you an opportunity. Actually, let's just give you the opportunity. Joseph, tell us about you. Tell us where what you do and where you're from, and a little bit of your journey.
Good evening. My name is Joe Barone. I'm diagnosed with spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy, which is just a fancy way for the insurance company to pay some bills that my muscles and my brain don't quite work well together. I've had over 42 surgeries, and to attend college, I actually had to change both state and federal law. And throughout my career journey, I have seen the best of times and the worst of times. I've seen employers basically frightened by my disability, and I've seen employers embrace my disability. And had I not been fortunate enough to be embraced by an employer to accept me for who I was and give me those career paths, I don't think that today I would have a family. So I ask all of you here today to please give someone with a disability a chance. Give them that road. We already know how to fight. As Michelle was saying, it takes an army for us to get from point A to B sometimes. We're very resourceful, but we need that entry in the door. We need that shot. I ask all of you, please give the next generation the same opportunities that I and so many others have experienced.
Wow, beautiful. Yes, Joe. That Joseph, that was. Did you go by Joe or Joseph? I want to call you the right.
Either way is fine. Typically, I hear
Okay.
Joseph when I'm in trouble, but either way is
Oh,
fine.
okay. Yeah. Well, I got that as a mom role. I have to ask. I don't want you
It's
to think
quite
that
all
you're in
right.
trouble. But Joe, you know what? While we're on the topic, and I'm just going to skip a question before we go back to Mark. But Joe, have you ever felt in all of your experience thus far that you had an equal seat at the table in your workplace? And if you have or have not, what did your employer need to do to have you feel like you had an equal seat at the table?
Today, I do feel. Today, I'm serving as the Director of IT for Remote Services for Lennar Corporation, and I just started past my 17th year anniversary. And part of the reason I've stayed at Lennar for 17 years is because I feel there that I have a seat at the table. And over time, you start to observe in your colleagues and your supervisors that they no longer see the disability. They no longer see you as a disabled employee. They simply see you as Joe. And just by recognizing your contributions to the company and not focusing on your disability, that makes you feel as though you have a seat at the table. One little interesting cocktail party fact that I always like to share: people with disabilities have the least amount of sick days used each and every year, year over year. And all you have to do as an employer is make everyone feel welcome, and people with disabilities will excel.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm so glad you found your place where you're at. That's wonderful. Everyone wants to feel purposeful and appreciated. So I'm glad that they make you feel that way. And Mark, what about you? Do you feel from some of your past experiences that you have an equal seat at the table when it comes to employment? Well, really, no. It was interesting tonight is to listen to other people's and on the panel share their stories and their experiences, and identify the same some of my experiences when we have opportunities to be able to get work, and so working is I try my best, I give my best effort all the time, and I get many recognized for different awards and different things and my efforts, and different businesses that experience, that I'm proud of it, that I've had some good experiences. However, most of the time, of my career, moving up, I don't feel like I do move up, and I don't feel like I have the opportunities the same. And I don't feel like I have the chance. Unfortunately, the answer would be no. But looking back, I'm wondering, I know a few people that will give me a chance or give deaf people a chance. Everyone is not working all collaboratively the way we would hope. And we would hope that we could have more chances and more procedures to be able to shift and grow and move, and different opportunities to be able to go into. But really, when I'm talking about work and growth professionally, I don't know. I feel like when I try to give, like for example, in a meeting with other coworkers, other peers, we have discussions about different topics of things. And myself, I take time to process and think about what it is I want to say and what type of comments I want to make and share in the discussions. But many times what happens is that the host or whoever is, facilitating the meeting will stop the meeting before I have an opportunity to give my feedback and share my thoughts. So that's one example of how I might feel that I don't have that seat at the table and I don't have that opportunity the same as some other people. And I feel like I don't have the opportunities for improvement or for services. So yeah, it's unfortunate. Well, thank you, Mark, so much for sharing that. You know, we want it to be all roses and we want everybody to have this great experiences, but the reality is that it's not such a rosy experience for everybody. And I know if you know Mark McGuire, you know he's going to come real raw and true, and he's going to tell it the way it is. So we have to change that so everyone has that Joe experience at work, and that is definitely the goal. I remember a couple of years back, I was working for a non-for-profit organization. It was one of my very first days on my job, and I overheard a hearing person screaming at a deaf person that they had to hurry to get to this job interview because Macy's was going to had the opportunity to hire this deaf woman. And I poked my head and I said, who's going to interpret the meeting? And the woman, the hearing caseworker said, we can't tell Macy's that she's deaf. She won't even have the interview. And I said, well, I think by the time you get there, they might realize that she's deaf. So what's the plan going to be? So, you know, it's just like, when do you disclose and when do you share and what do you do when you get there and you don't have the things that you need? And then the opportunity, it seems like it becomes such a burden. So again, back to the beginning of not just having to wait to be asked, but just to provide it right off the cuff. So, I want to move on a little bit here and just share with you, or ask actually, and it's just going back to Mark again, because we went out of order a little bit, but Mark, what are some of the barriers or some of the successes from your own with the hiring process? Well, really, most of the time I have barriers in the hiring process. It starts with the form, right? It starts with all of these forms and they ask for a phone number for the application, right? They ask for a phone number. So for many years, we only had a TTY, right? So we didn't have, most of the time, most employers didn't even know how to, or what a TTY was or how to use it or how it worked. So that was right off the cuff a barrier. But now we have, our video phone, VRS, Video Relay Services. It's called a VP, a video phone for short. And it does help. It has helped the process, but still my experience is pretty much the same as before, meaning the attitude. It's a barrier because of the attitude that people have. So they're not aware that when you're calling someone through a video relay service, that a person themselves are announcing who they are, what they're doing, what's going on. And so, for example, if for an operator like, hi, this is operator 305 and I'm calling for Mark McGuire, they make an announcement before when the person first answers the phone, right? So then it starts, I start talking and I start signing, I tell them my name, it's Mark, but it's in a woman's voice, right? It's not a man's voice speaking for me. So they're like, well, wait a minute, it's very confusing for some people. They could hear, but it's very confusing that this doesn't sound like a Mark, right? Sometimes they hang up. They think it's the wrong, a wrong person or wrong call. So if we try to call back, then it's like, they're too busy to talk to me. So that's something. So 90% and 99% of the time, people would hang up as soon as they heard that it was a relay operator. So that's a barrier. So yeah, I have so many barriers. We could do a whole panel just on that, but really, I want to be able to share with other people. So yes, thank you for sharing that. Michelle, do you have any success stories or barriers that you would like to share about employment and how that's all worked for you?
Sure. Well, I've actually, had pretty good experiences. This is Michelle again. When like I have a wheelchair, but it's pretty hard to miss that. It's in the before times when we would have in-person interviews, I'd always make sure to ask like, oh, is the space that we're going to be interviewing wheelchair accessible? Because that's for me. I want to make sure I'm able to get into the room, and I've always encountered. But I'm also kind of intentional too. Like I do my research when I'm looking for a job. I look at their website to see, do they have a business resource group for people with disabilities? Because there's lots of different affinity groups in all these different companies. And if they don't have one that mentions disability, I'm like, I don't know if I even would want to work there. And I'm pretty intentional where I like research, where my office will be. And if it's going to be in a very old building with stairs and probably, narrow hallways, I'm probably not going to apply there. So, I do a little research first, but then when I do apply and I, talk to the recruiter, and if I do get an interview, I'm lucky. I make sure to ask, is this place wheelchair accessible? What kind of, what's your space like? Where's the entrance, etc. And I think that kind of gives them the red flag. Oh, she's got a wheelchair, and kind of preps them for the fact that gives them a heads up. And I don't think I've ever really had a bad experience, interviewing, because I tend to be more transparent, about my disability. And when I go to like shake their hand, like my hand doesn't grip at all. And so I'm like, oh, don't worry. I kind of try to make light and be humorous about it and make a joke, but there's no real shit. Like, oh, I have a terrible handshake, so I kind of like lighten the mood as well. But there are barriers in the fact that like physical spaces are not accessible always, for people with mobility challenges. And a huge thing that in this day and age where the pandemic, like the one maybe bright thing about the pandemic is we're allowed to do remote work now. And that's opened huge doors for people with disabilities. And now I don't have to worry about, is my office going to be accessible? Is the bathroom going to be accessible? Stuff like that. We all have to do our human things. And so now it's like a huge worry that I don't have to like worry about like, the office and stuff like that. So I think that nowadays, like, I hope remote work is here to stay, like fingers crossed. But yeah, that's what I have to say.
That's your journey. Well, thank you for sharing that. Most common concern for employers that I've noticed through my experience with my workplace accessibility group is that cost, right? Cost is the number one thing. And they think, well, if I make this accommodation, it's going to cost me this. If I do this, so it's more about the big picture they're thinking instead of individual needs, and not understanding that there are things in place. There are tax credits in place and things. So I know that the one thing that people tell me often is that if I hire a deaf person, then I have to hire an interpreter. So that's I have to hire two people for one job. And it's a problem to so many, and they're not understanding. So I'm just wondering, Debbie, if you could share with us a little bit. I know that you're so full of resources, just like Sam is, but if you could share with us, like, how did the city navigate with that? And I know that the city of Boynton Beach has just recently employed Jan, who's on this call. Janice, we're excited for you to work in IT. And Jan is deaf. I hope you don't mind me sharing that. I'm sure she won't, but she's working at the city of Boynton Beach, and there, you didn't have to hire a full-time interpreter. So can you talk a little bit about that, Debbie, and how do we get leaders of companies to change the narrative about hiring people with disabilities?
Sure. Thank you, Beth. And we are thrilled to have Janice work with us at the city of Boynton Beach. She's extremely talented and really has brought so much to our IT department in their time of need. So I think it all begins with education. It's so important to make sure that the leaders of the business, the organization, and city manager, the commissioners, the mayor understand that there's a lot of talent out there. We work closely with our HR department on educating them, having them look at their policies and procedures and be prepared. And but as far as the financial part, honestly, our partnerships with other organizations, those that provide employees or job applicants, I should say, have been very helpful. So, for example, in the situation with Janice, what we did was we partnered with a group called Work Opportunities Unlimited. They're in the Palm Beach County area. And they, through working with them, they were able to also partner with vocational rehab. And through all of that, we were able to get some technology. We were able to get some initial sign language interpreters for onboarding. And we have now, Janice is using a tablet. We have apps on the phone. There's great apps. I know Sam's got some great apps to share, I'm sure too. But there's a lot of free resources out there, and it's a matter of educating the leaders, the budget people, you know, that this is available. It's not going to break your bank, and you're going to be thrilled probably with the results. We also, I think someone mentioned earlier, JAWS. I think it was Sam mentioned JAWS. The job, sorry, I forgot. Oh, job access with speech, where it reads back the information on a computer screen or allow someone who is not able to use a mouse to get that information. And the JAWS program came through us for Ted to use, my assistant, through the Florida Division of Blind Services. And training came through the Lighthouse for the Blind of the Palm Beaches. And many of these organizations, Career Source has a whole section that is focused on employment of individuals with disabilities, and that's nationwide. So there are many organizations out there that do provide support. Best Buddies, if you've ever heard of Best Buddies International, it's a nonprofit that has individuals with developmental or intellectual disabilities. They provide job coaches, and that job coach is with that individual for the entire length of their employment. So there's a lot of resources out there, and it's a matter of educating those that will make that decision that to go ahead and change policies, modify things slightly. And that way, when the individual shows up to apply for the position, you've got it already, you know, you're at least more than halfway there to be ready for that person to come in and work for you.
Wow.
This is Michelle.
Yeah.
Can I add something? Sorry.
Please, please.
So I love everything that you know, Debbie just said. And I just wanted to add, like, it's not always just for the people who are going to apply. It's also for the folks at your company now. Like, you never know when somebody could join the disability community. Like, I wasn't planning at, you know, in 2003 to be in a wheelchair, and, you know, who knows what's going to happen at any point in time. So if, you know, these these resources are available in your company, they will be available to everybody to be able to use and benefit from. And I think that's important because, you know, anyone could have a visual impairment. Who knows? You know, we don't know the future. And it's just like, I think to be inclusive and to be to think about inclusion is to think about disability. And, you know, disability touches everyone in very, very, very stages of life, but also it's any gender, any race, any ethnicity, you know, and so that's an important, it's not a they thing, it's an us thing.
And
Yeah,
don't always assume,
absolutely.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
And
Joe. No, go ahead.
Another bit of advice is for those that are in the hiring manager role, don't always assume that because someone has a medical assistant with them or some sort of adaptive piece of technology that cost will be passed on to the employer, because most disabled applicants are very resourceful, and by the time they've gotten to the application stage have already secured grants and outside funding for their accommodations. For instance, my
Right.
medical assistant is not on the payroll of my employer.
Right. And I think a lot of the things, and thank you for sharing that, all of you, that Debbie had mentioned, a lot of those are free resources, right? So they're not extra expenses. And Michelle, what you're saying is so valuable, in that making sure that policies are just done again ahead of time instead of the wait. So if we have these discussions and we're planning ahead, because it can happen anytime. I think you might have said it earlier, Michelle, or somebody said not yet disabled. right? Because anytime, any one of us, it could happen, anything could happen. I had a dear friend who worked for Florida Power and Light as an engineer, and woke up one morning and then, you know, he became deaf and his whole life changed. But you don't plan for these things to happen, and we all have things to contend with. So I think having these conversations with your HR and with decision makers is really important, to have these conversations immediately instead of waiting until you have to kind of be in panic mode. How would we fix this? Let's just do it. So very valuable. I appreciate all of that. Sam, did you want to add any of that, or can I ask you my next question?
Go ahead and ask. I was we're having some conversations about interviews and virtual interviews and how that impacts people with disabilities and the choice to disclose or not, or how to, or when to. So, but you get to interview the company too. You get to know whether or not they have the word accessibility and disability on their website and their metadata. You get to find out if in an interview process, they have the ability to make an inclusive communication channel open to you for the interview. So you get to learn a good bit about the company as well. And hopefully, in the best world, it's an opportunity for the companies to expand their consideration and grow their communication channels and modes to be inclusive. But we all get to learn about the places if they don't have the words accessibility or disability on their website, if they don't have a disability resource group, if they can't have captions or sign language available, or if somebody looks at you funny if you say, well, my personal presentation is, I'm letting you know in advance so that when we talk tomorrow, you can learn about whether or not that's a place you want to spend your time and energy if you have a choice. So
yeah. Well, that was exactly what I was about to ask you anyway. So you answered it without me having to ask. And so the last question before we go into our breakout sessions, and it's for really anybody to answer. And when we do go into our breakout sessions, I hope that we could just share more resources about tax credits maybe that businesses could look into in order to make workplaces accessible and things. But, you know, building a culture of accessibility and is what we're trying to do, right? We want a cultural of accessibility and providing ways for people to be successful. So do any of you have advice for hiring managers? I remember Elizabeth started in the very beginning of this conversation saying, even if I wanted to hire somebody, which I do want to, because I know her heart and I know what she's committed to doing, but what are some of the conversations we could have with hiring managers to create this culture? I mean, I know this is a really long, we could talk about this for hours, but just quickly, maybe if somebody could touch on what that looks like and how we could have those conversations. Does anybody have anything they would like to share about that?
can I offer like show me the accessibility starting point? Is if businesses have a commitment to accessibility, we have to start only making purchases of products and services that are accessible so that our delivery systems, our communication methods, and our way of doing business can be utilized by everyone, no matter what kind of assistive technology or adaptive strategy they use. Businesses have to buy in from the top, and they have to show it, do the work, make the changes. That it has to start. So we have to start at the top and at procurement. It doesn't belong only with IT. It doesn't belong only with HR. It doesn't only belong with an ADA officer.
With that, does anybody else want to add anything to that before we go into our breakout rooms? Or
Sure, this is
wow,
Michelle. I can add one more thing.
Yes,
I just wanted to
please.
say, like, inclusion and all these things are top of mind in a lot of leaders' mind, and everyone wants to be more diverse now, which is great, because as a woman of color, I'm all for these things. But also, when you are deliberate about inclusion, disability is something that, like we just talked about, can touch anybody in any color, any race. And so when you're deliberately and intentionally looking to hire more people with disabilities, you're automatically getting that diversity factor. So it's very nice. It's kind of like checking more boxes all in one, and if you talking about like talent and recruiters and stuff like that, they do, kind of go to certain schools and certain, wherever, but also just to talk to not just career services, but going to the school's like disability resource center is a great place to find candidates and students with disabilities who are, very qualified, are earning degrees as well. So that's an easy place to start if you are kind of like, where do I go? But also, like all the resources that I'm sure that everybody else can talk about, but there are a lot of resources out there. But hiring somebody with a disability is kind of already checking more boxes and with tax credits. So how can you go wrong, really? I just don't know.
You can't. Well, Elizabeth, I really hope that we have given you some information that you can take away, and everybody who's attended this evening can learn something. And I hope you stick around for some of the breakout rooms. And thank you all so much for sharing your journey and your stories. And we look forward to continually working together to change it, to change the whole narrative and just make our world, our workplace, our social lives, our entertainment, all accessible for everybody all the time, and remove all of the negative stereotypes that people fear. I think it's education piece was key. And we mentioned that early on, that the education part really brings it home. So anyway, thank you so much. And Elizabeth, I'm going to send it back to you to direct us next.
You're on mute, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, I always say the best things when I'm on mute. It's terrible. So I'm sharing my screen so that y'all can see the breakout rooms. Panelists, if you can note what breakout room you're assigned to. I'm going to pop it up in just a minute. Everyone will be able to select which breakout room they're in. Nikki, I realize that since I created the breakout rooms, I think I'm going to be the one that has to stay in the main room. So who would I assign to be a co-host? Because we need a co-host in each breakout room to make sure that captions are on, and I think we can record in a breakout room. I hope we can.
Mara from our team is on, so you could make her a co-host.
Okay. All right. So with that, I'm going to pop up the rooms and just select the room that you want to attend. And as I mentioned, panelists, make sure you jump in the room that I have highlighted for you. I think Clara, our second interpreter, you will go into breakout room 2 and enjoy. And I'll call you back in about 15 minutes. And tell me if you did not get the pop-up.
I did not see anything, Elizabeth. This is Debbie.
Okay, let me see what I can do.
Got to scroll down where it says breakout rooms. Debbie, do you see that?
Oh, I do.
Bottom right.
Yeah, I'm also
Oh.
seeing that I can start assigning people if I have to. So.
Okay, I just don't know how to move in there. I clicked on room 1.
It should pop you right in there.
You-
Let me see if I can assign you, Beth.
You can mouse over to the right and there's a join button next to room 1 and room 2.
To zip it, and so we're going to just ask that Debbie and Mark lead this discussion. If you have any questions or resources you want to share, Mark, you have anything on your mind you want to start the conversation with, or just wait until there's a question? Debbie, you want to go ahead? Mark is saying, ladies first.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much, Mark. So first, I wanted to give you just a few resources. So if you have not heard of these, that first thing tomorrow morning, you can get your cup of coffee and go online and check some of these out. one of the most important ones as far as inclusive hiring and creating that culture of inclusion in your workplace is a website called Ask Jan. So it's www.askjan.org. And that is, it's the Job Accommodation Network. JAN stands for Job Accommodation Network. And that is really like an A to Z of everything that you could possibly think of. It was just such a helpful resource for us at the city. In that you will find that there's sections underneath for different situations. They have it for private business, state and local government, and others. But there's another section called Other Resources. And if you look for that, there's an Employer Assistance Resource Network, or EARN. And it's a free resource. It has sections on recruitment, hiring, retaining, and advancing employees with disabilities. And they also have a publication that is a definite benefit to have. Again, these are all free. It's called Inclusion at Work, and it's a framework for building a disability inclusive organization. And those I just would really highly recommend. If there's nothing else you remember that I've said, go to Jan. And would have been really cool if my name was Jan, but that is not the case. So there's also a workplace accommodation toolkit that you'll find on that website. And that is comprehensive online resources for employees that are seeking to go beyond just the compliance with the ADA, but to really create that inclusive workforce. And there's different sections, there's subject matter experts and more to really help you. So that is one really great resource. If you, one of the things we mentioned earlier was if you have an employee or an applicant who is deaf, there's the Video Relay Service, the VRS. If you're not familiar with that, Sorensen is a provider, and you can go on their website. Also, they do provide free video phones to employees who use ASL as their first language. And it's a very simple process for a business or a company. It's a little 2-page thing you fill out. They have someone come and bring the equipment, train anybody that needs to have any training. And again, if the individual who uses ASL normally is using ASL, they probably have a video phone and even at their home or on their cell phone. So they're probably very familiar with it. Something else we did do as an employer was use those clear masks that Elizabeth or somebody was talking about earlier. We have the clear masks. You can get them through the Clear Mask Company. The JAWS screen reader is available through Freedom Scientific. It's freedomscientific.com. And that is provided for free for an employee who needs to use that screen reader technology. So those were just a couple of resources I just want to make sure I shared with you before we all get going. They'll be available also with the resource information after the sessions are ended. So I can turn it over to Mark if there's anything you want to add before we go around and see if there's questions.
Okay. Okay, yeah. Only thing that's really important here is that I want to be able to share with you is that the presentation, the keynote presentation with Kimberly, her story. I have a diverse group for deaf and hard of hearing people. Is very diverse, meaning that we have assistive technology and captions, and we have sign language, and we also have human technology like sign interpreters as well. So it's really important for all of you to know that not all deaf people or hard of hearing people know how to sign, right? Or to use captions. So it's really important to make sure that we offer both options all the time, because how do I say, if you give both it's equal chance. You get an equal chance to be more inclusive. So that's really important. So myself, I'm just curious if everyone in this group, in this room now, how many of you have experienced, I don't know, communication, having conversations with people who are deaf or hard of hearing? Maybe you could raise your hand or you could type in the chat or something like that. So Ryan has, Leslie has. I'm so curious about your experience and what did you feel your challenge was? Yeah, good question. Who would like to start?
I can talk to you in my experience. I mean, it wasn't necessarily in the professional realm. I remember growing up and my brother's best friend had his parents, both of their parents, his parents were deaf. And it was intriguing as a young boy, you know, seeing both of the parents deaf and the struggles that they dealt with. And I'll have to mention I was raised in Europe, and so Europe is a little bit more accommodating when it comes to specific types of disabilities, not all. It was just. It was very eye-opening to sort of observe the struggles that they dealt with, but also the communication barriers and how the children more often than not actually had to function as interpreters for the parents, in just trying to get just standard, normal, regular, daily things done. And it was, so I was left with that impression from a very young age. Obviously, I learned that it wasn't, an impediment to living a life, but it was eye-opening to understand the challenges.
Oh, interesting. Thank you for saying that. Anybody else? Leslie, you're nodding. Join us.
I guess I had both personal and professional. My aunt was deaf, but she learned how to use. She knew ASL, but then she would use common things that we would understand as kids for her signs. So we all knew what she was saying, and of course she was really good with reading lips. So that was helpful. But when I was working, I was at a local hospital for many years, and I was in charge of the TTY and the contracts for all of the in-person interpreters. We got really large iPads, like 21-inch iPads on carts that we would take to patient rooms for translations, both for deaf and language. We had a lot in this area between Haitian and Spanish. We had a lot of language translation to do. But so I worked with all of that and the difficulties that the patients and the physicians and the family understanding in the medical terminology, and so the patients and you have to provide that. The patients you're doing surgery and the patient doesn't understand what's going on. So it was really critical in the healthcare area.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else want to join in? Hi, Rogine. Anybody else? Thoughts?
Beth, I did have a question, and I planned to ask this question earlier, and then Joe addressed it to some degree. So my question was, and forgive my ignorance on the topic, to what degree are there perhaps any government promoted or subsidized programs to basically help folks that do have this that are disabled into the employment market. So, one of the interesting things that was said earlier was that a lot of times employers are fearful because of the cost. Or maybe fearful because of the cost. So if it's just a cost equation, we've already noted, Joe mentioned that, folks with disabilities generally have the lowest rate of sick days and are highly productive. So if it's just a cost consideration, it would seem that can be offset both by, organizations that are out there that have grants available, but you would also think that there might have to be some sort of a policy or government, well, again, policy in place to help offset, some of these challenges that we're seeing. And again, maybe it exists, and therefore forgive my ignorance on the topic.
So Debbie or
No.
anybody else? Yeah, Debbie, can you answer that?
Just, well, I know there are tax credits for a for-profit organization, a business. I worked for a municipal government, so we were not eligible for that. So I don't have a great deal of knowledge, but I know Sam does. So when you get into the next breakout, she'll probably be able to elaborate on that a little bit more. But I know, I think it kind of the cost, the concern about the cost goes back to just not being informed and educated on employing individuals with disabilities. I think that's the first step, is gathering the information and sharing that information. The statistics that were in the PowerPoint show, slideshow that our keynote speaker gave were great, because those are eye-opening. When you think about a quarter of the population is disabled, and it's also that group that anybody can be a member of at any day and any time. You don't have to have any particular background. It could be any of us. And so I think just getting that information out, that's kind of where we started. And I surrounded myself with, I started out with 4 or 5 different organizations and individuals that either serve or advocate for people with disabilities, or they are disabled. I surrounded myself with different groups. It's grown to over 20 different organizations today, just in 6 years. Government moves at a snail's pace, but we were on fast forward. So surrounding yourself with those resources is really, I highly recommend. That will help you educate and know how to educate others.
Interesting that of all organizations, that government is the one that is not eligible.
I know. That's okay.
Right.
Go figure.
We'll get there regardless.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. We're leaving with 31 seconds. Anybody else have anything they want to say really fast? Nikki?
I actually haven't, Beth, had a lot of experience, with people with disabilities, unfortunately. So I've actually met, I think, more people from meeting you, Beth, that kind of pulled, a lot of these people into my life. So I'm actually really blessed to just even be learning any of this now. This is all a whole completely new world for me. So just
Welcome back.
That was very, very quick. That was the fastest 15 minutes I've ever had.
So, and I have to admit that this is the first time I'm doing breakout rooms. And it looks like it's going to try to put you all back in the same room, which is not what I wanted. Let's see what I can do here. All right, I think I figured it out. So the panelists, you're going to go out into the same room number that you did before. Attendees, if you want to switch and talk to the other set of panelists that you didn't talk to this time, feel free to switch rooms. Or if you're just having a great time and you want to continue, then go back into the same room. So I'm going to open them up and join the rooms that you want to participate in. And again, anyone who's having trouble joining, just let me know and I can put you in the room you want to. Beth, you need help? back in room one.
Please. Thank you.
Sure.
Embarrassed. I also work at Lennar Corporation. That's how I actually know Joe, and was quite impressed by his story. I had the opportunity to hear it a couple of weeks ago. I'm on the board of SIM South Florida. I'm on the board of ISACA South Florida, and I'm on the board of Miami Beach United. So I kind of keep myself busy. Plus, I also have a day job, believe it or not. So I. And in terms of my experience with disabilities, I have a plethora of friends and acquaintances that have dealt with disabilities. Probably my first experience that I remember as a child with disabilities, which I mentioned in the previous session, was my brother's best friend. Grew up with both of his parents were deaf, and so I at a young age, I was exposed to the interactions of the children and serving as interpreters to the parents.
Interesting. Wow. Awesome. You're a busy man, and thanks for sharing. We're going to do the popcorn style. So Ryan, who do you want to popcorn into next?
I would say Joe, but we know Joe. So in that case, let me just pick somebody randomly. Rogine, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You just got to unmute you.
Hi guys, my name is Rogine. I'm a designer. Well, I do social media marketing. My disability, I have CP. I'm also trying to study for my CPAC, so I'm in the process of and I see myself as a person with a disability. I feel like just a regular person, just have a unique way. So I'm happy to be here.
We're happy you're here too. Thanks for sharing. Who would you like to popcorn into next?
Heather.
All right, Heather.
Hi, my name is Heather. I'm a product designer in Columbus, Ohio, and I have multiple sclerosis, and I've also been interested in accessibility from like digital perspective for years.
Awesome. And it's super hot topic right now. So,
Yes.
And we're glad you're doing the things you're doing. So thank you. Who do you want to popcorn it to next?
I'll popcorn it to Leslie.
Welcome back, everyone. So I'm going to turn over in a second for Nikki to do our closing remarks. Just a quick question. I think everybody should have the reactions down at the bottom or in your Zoom bar. If you like the questions and answers in the breakout room format or didn't like them, give me a reaction. How did you like doing the question and answers in that format? Got a thumbs up from Beth. Lisa's given us a thumbs up. Mark as well. Oh, we got a heart from Nikki. Got some claps and more thumbs ups. All right, I think that was a successful way to do questions and answers. All right, so just turning it over to Nikki to bring us home.
Thank you, thank you. And I'm going to see if I can switch this. I'm trying to do two things at once. There we go. Hi. All right. I know I'm trying to do the technical stuff plus this. So hopefully I did a good job of it. So I wanted to, of course, just say thank you to, of course, all of our organizers, the panelists, you know, ASL interpreters, Beth, moderating, Elizabeth, of course, for opening us up and all the welcome remarks as well. You know, of course, it takes a village to put on something that is very good and also very educational. And I think, at least for me, it was very educational, and hopefully it was for you guys as well. Actually, I just realized as I'm talking to, because I know the captions are on, Beth or was it Kara? Did one of you want to come and do the ASL interpretation?
Claire is interpreting right now. So if you want to spotlight Clara, that
Yes,
would
because I
be
just
great.
realized I want to make sure she's up with me. There we go. Okay, now we can all see you. Perfect.
Perfect. Thanks.
Of course, of course. So I just wanted to close this all out with just, you know, as we were kind of coming up to this event and kind of organizing, I did read a few articles, and one of them really stuck out into my head because it was a really short, sweet, to the point article, but I think really gave some really good tips on how we can be advocates or allies for those with disabilities. So I wanted to just ask the question of, what are you doing to help build an inclusive community? So there are over 1.5 billion people on the entire planet that have disabilities. And I think that's a huge number that people don't realize. I think earlier we were showing, I think it might've been the keynote that was saying there was like 1 in 4 people in the US. So allyship is really important to making sure that like our world is more accessible. And I think that means people with and without disabilities need to be advocates or allies. So the article that I had read that really stuck out, I really just wanted to read to, obviously not the entire article, but just the bullet points of kind of the, you know, the main takeaways and really what stuck with me. So the main thing was there were 8 takeaways on how you can best be the best possible ally for those with disabilities. So the first one was educate yourself. So making sure that you can learn the different models of disability, discovering the tons of reasons why those with accessibility are just as valuable and important, and why accessibility really matters. And there's really tons of resources out there, from books and podcasts, different documentaries, things that you can find on social media. So really just doing the education. I know that with anything in diversity and inclusion is all about trying to educate yourself and not putting that stress on the person with the disability, or making them be the one to have to educate you. Is trying to do that on your own. The second piece of advice in the article was respecting individuality. So respecting the individual, recognize that every person is different. We all have our own learned experiences, our own lives, and basically just, you know, being, I think somebody also on the panel said earlier, being an engaged and active listener, because really the only ways that you're going to learn about people with different disabilities is by respecting the individual stories that people bring to the table, as everybody experiences disabilities in a different way. The third thing is making your content accessible. So whether it's your website, whether it's a blog, article, podcast, whatever it may be, you don't have to be a marketer or a content creator, anybody, you know, special that's in that market to do it. As simple as, you know, what we've been trying to do here, using transcriptions, you know, things like that. So just trying to make your content that you're sharing accessible to everybody, because of course there's a lot of people out there that if you don't, they're not getting this content. The fourth thing was consider accessibility in everything that you do. So a lot of what we talked about tonight is being proactive. So asking questions, especially in the workplace, of your employers. So why do you not have a wheelchair ramp? You know, why can't we add, you know, the transcriptions to our podcasts or to some of our virtual workshops? So starting to look around you and paying attention to the things that are there for accessibility and maybe aren't, and questioning your employers. And I think by beginning to question them, you kind of plant that seed into the employer's minds of like, okay, why don't we have this? And I think a lot of times being proactive is maybe pointing out the things that are not already put in place before, again, somebody with a disability has to, for lack of better words, out themselves and say, hey, I have a disability, I can't do this, or this isn't accessible. That we should start doing that, to be allies and looking around and seeing maybe what we can start questioning from our employers. The next thing was hire and promote people with disabilities. So I know this is an easy one, but it's also more difficult said than done, is that a lot of people with disabilities don't get promoted. They're often passed over for opportunities. So inclusion is not just about having representation on your board or having representation in your company, but also making sure that people with disabilities also get the same opportunity and there's equity in the opportunities that are offered. The next one was diversifying your feed and amplifying voices with people of disabilities. So when you're sharing things on social media, a lot of times, I actually heard somebody speak years ago, I think it was at a TEDx event, that was saying that we are now our own news. We are our own media, that it's not just down to the people that are on TV, that we're now becoming media creators because we share so much stuff on social media. And that's what people are reading and seeing and kind of the education that they're taking in. So start following people that are disability advocates and influencers on social media, reading, engaging with their posts, sharing their posts. So the more that you can amplify people's voices with disabilities or the content creators around those that are advocates, again, that helps with education. The last 2 points, the last one's my favorite, but the second to last one was advocate proactively. So again, being a part of the movement, even if you don't have a disability. So speak up when you see maybe microaggressions, speak up when you see people using terminology of ableism or different language behaviors. So just making sure that you're standing up, being an advocate, being an ally, but being proactive. My last one is my favorite. I know that I've actually had a conversation about this directly, even for myself personally with Beth. So the last one is showing up imperfectly. Being a good ally, in my opinion, is you don't have to be perfect. You just have to show that you're trying. It's a process. We're all learning. We're all educating ourselves. And it's always a journey. And as long as we're continuing with that journey and educating ourselves along the way, that it's okay. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know all the answers. I think it might have been Debbie that even when you were speaking at one point was saying, hey, I don't know the answer to this, but this might be a good place to look. So we don't have to have the answers, and even experts in the field don't always have the answers. So just starting off by being okay with not being perfect, being okay not knowing all the answers, and being okay answering or asking people that may be experts in the field. So of course, to close this all out, again, I wanted to say thank you, and just wanted to leave that question out there of how are you helping with inclusivity, and what action are you going to take to help us be a more accessible community? And that's all I have for us tonight. Elizabeth, did you want to close out with anything at all, or are we just going to say bye and hopefully see you guys soon?
I think you did an excellent job. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We are so grateful for your attention, and I hope this was beneficial and helpful to you. And we'll send out the resources that we've talked about as soon as we have them ready and compiled. So thank you again. Have a great rest of your evening.
Night, everybody. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye.